Hey everyone, it's Mr. Sinti, and I'm happy to talk to you today about secondary growth. And secondary growth is all about the lateral growth that an herb experiences when it becomes a woody plant. And so wood is secondary growth, and in particular it's secondary xylem. And so it's when a plant is putting down some girth. And one of the one of the most important things before we get into the detail is why would you want secondary growth? You'd want secondary growth, you'd want thickening in your shoot or your stem so that you can provide stability for more and more branching, so you can increase the surface area of photosynthesis and leaves ultimately. And again, it's not just getting thick supplies strength, but it also allows for the conduction of even more water up and down the plant as well. And so secondary growth, stability, increased water transportation in the plant. So let's get right into that conversation. And so let's jump into that. Let me first start off. I wanted to show you this picture here to start off, and then we'll go to something else. This is a picture of a cross-section of a woody plant. You can see here, this is typical wood. In the center here is called heartwood, and then you have sapwood, and then over here is the bark on the outside of the tree. And so let me actually come down here and sort of take this up to the top. I just want to start off with that picture though, if you don't mind, and then I'll start here. So secondary growth is all about lateral meristems. And so lateral meristems, remember, are the two meristems that are found in plants as opposed to the primary meristems, which are apical on the top of the shoot and on the bottom of the root. These ones produce vascular tissue and also periderm. So there's a vascular cambium and a cork cambium. These are the two lateral meristems which are going to provide girth or size to the tree, and they're going to produce something called secondary xylem and phloem, and then cork cambium, which is going to produce the cork on the outside. And so cork cambium and cork are periderm. And so that's what our conversation's all about. You know, the truth is, most monocots don't have a lot of secondary growth. We're talking about dicots at this point, just in case you're wondering. And so one of the things that I wanted to say about this vascular cambium is that it's a ring, so a circular ring in the stem of dicot. And what's interesting is the C stands for vascular cambium. And so what the C cells are capable of division, so they're mitotic. So they're meristematic, so they divide. And not only do they divide, they differentiate into a derivative, and then ultimately it'll specialize into phloem. So here we have phloem, that's what the P stands for, and then X is xylem. So vascular cambium is going to make secondary vascular tissue. Vascular cambium is. And what's interesting is, and I'll come back to another picture that shows this a little bit better, is that do you see every time it divides, you produce a few phloem cells, but you produce a lot of xylem cells, and a lot more xylem cells are produced than phloem cells when this occurs, and I'll show you pictures of that later. So just to note that. And so here's a picture of some real cells. You know, you could look at this and think that you understand something, but this is the real tissue. Here's the vascular cambium. This is the xylem. So eventually the cells divide through mitosis, and then they specialize into xylem, and up here is the phloem. And so here's again another cross section. Let me highlight it here blue. So here's the cells, the sort of the C cells, the if you will, I'm not sure why that's not drawing. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, so here's the vascular cambium. So these are the cells that are dividing, and when they divide, they make the xylem cells towards the inner part of the tree and the phloem towards the outside. So this is the phloem out here, and all of this is the xylem. Okay, and what do we have here? Well, we have these tracheids, which are these thin cells, and then we have the vessel elements, which are a little bit thicker. Okay, and this is one type of vascular lateral meristem, vascular cambium. The other one is cork cambium. And so here's another cross-section. I'll stay with the blue. And so here is your thin layer of vascular cambium right there. There's your vascular cambium, and that's meristematic, lateral meristem. So toward the inner, this is the inside of the tree, this is xylem. This is 1 year and then another year. Here, the reason for the fact that these are a little bit wider and these are not is that in the spring, it tends to rain a little bit more. So winter, spring, it's raining, and then in the summer, the dry season, it's not raining as much. And so you're able to see this is, to the naked eye, that would be an annual ring, that sort of thing. And so this is what we call wood. And it's the thickest part of the tree. Now, this is all xylem. So xylem is wood, and it's considered to be sapwood. I'll get into that in a moment. This is what conducts the water in a tree. This over here, this layer right here is the phloem. This is the phloem right in here. This is conducting sugar water. And then over here, hard to see it, but right over here is this this is the vascular cambium. This is the cork cambium. This is also meristematic. So let me go red with meristematic. So this is lateral meristem, and this is producing cork cells, which are the outermost cells of the tree, and this is filled up with cork, and collectively cork cambium and cork cells are considered to be periderm, and then this right in here, this one little layer of phloem, which is primary phloem, is considered to be the bark. And so here we are again, slightly different but similar picture. This black line is the vascular cambium. This is the, see if you can guess what is that, that's xylem. This is phloem right over here on this side. So we have vascular cambium, cork cambium, the two lateral meristems. So close up of the vascular cambium. I mentioned the vascular cambium is what produces secondary growth, and so it produces these secondary phloem, which is made up of the sieve tube members, and this is tracheids and vessel elements. This is a great shot. So this is say it's a tree, but at this point it's really, really young. And so if you were to cut it cross-section, take a look at a young tree, what you would see is basically there's this little pie shape cut from the cylinder. It's pretty much like a dicot stem would look like. It has these vascular bundles. You remember this? Vascular bundles. Right here, you're looking at xylem. This dark brown area is xylem. This is phloem, and it's considered to be primary. The secondary hasn't been put down yet. The secondary will be put down when this vascular cambium starts to divide a little bit more. And so as a result of the cells dividing, it's going to actually push the primary toward the center, and the primary phloem will be the outermost part of the tree when you take a look at that. So here's the cortex, which is this sort of ground tissue on the outside, which is giving support before the fact that the secondary xylem is going to be the real support of the tree. Let me go back here. These ray initials and fusiform initials are these lateral cells that will differentiate, which will conduct fluid laterally in the plant. And so here you can see the plant's getting a little bit older. Notice how secondary growth is happening a little bit further down towards the soil here. This is where the plant's going to get really thick over time. This should remain the same. This is where primary growth is occurring. So these ray initials, it's a great name, ray initials are providing these sort of spokes, like in a bicycle wheel, which is conducting, see where it says the xylem rays are right there and the phloem rays are right there. That's conducting tissue fluid laterally in the plant. It's not just up and down, but it's mainly up and down. And so here you can see a close-up of this. And so I want to focus on this slide. This is a really important one. So do you notice how this is just primary up here? now you first get to see secondary growth. And what I mean by secondary growth, take a look right here. Secondary growth is happening right here in the vascular cambium. What do you mean? Cells are dividing. So these are the initials. Just to the inside of the vascular cambium is, you guessed it, secondary xylem. This is going to be wood. This is going to be sapwood, and it's going to get really thick as the plant gets older. This is what conducts the water up and down a tree. These cells are dead at maturity. It's okay. They're dead. Just to the outer part of the vascular cambium is the secondary phloem. Notice the primary phloem is still a little bit thicker, but that's here nor there. There's going to be a lot more secondary xylem than secondary phloem as we move on. Here's the cork cambium, which produces the cork. So again, here's a close-up of the xylem. You can see here the rays that are going laterally. Here's the annual rings, meaning late wood, early wood, meaning like rainy season, dry season. And so wood, which is shown right here, is secondary xylem, right in there, secondary xylem. And you can see how it's 1, 2, 3 major rings because it's dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, wet. So you can see that. And so wood is basically xylem. It's mainly tracheids and vessel elements. The reason that it's so strong is that it has a secondary cell wall. And each year, the vascular cambium gives rise to a lot of secondary xylem. You look at how much more, this is the picture that I was alluding to before, look how much more secondary xylem there is than secondary phloem. Secondary phloem is not as important as moving the sugar water down as it is water going up. You need a lot more water going up. And so not only does wood, sapwood, provide a lot of water movement, but it also provides a lot of strength. Okay, something to think about. And so now look at this. We're going further down. You can see now this tree is getting thicker towards the bottom. And the reason it's getting thicker, it's growing laterally, so girth. The reason it's getting thicker is now look what you've done. The vascular cambium has put down not only 1 year, well, this is still 1 year, but it's the late wood and the early wood. But you see here's the sap wood, here's the secondary phloem, here's the secondary xylem. And as years go on, this layer right here, let me emphasize it, this layer right here will eventually make the ring. So that'll be 1 year, and then the next year, and the next year. And so in temperate regions, the secondary growth in a perennial plant ceases in the winter. Well, that means that in an area where the leaves are deciduous, in other words, they're dropping their leaves, obviously there's not going to be a lot of growth occurring at that time. Maybe in the tropics where the leaves are there perpetually, or always, perpetually I meant to say, things are a little bit different. And so the thickness of the cells provides physical support. That's what I wanted to say. And so you get this sort of dormancy, and then you get early wood production, late wood production, and that's what results in the growth of the annual rings, as you can see here. This is 3 years. So 1, 2, and 3. Here's your vascular cambium. This is all secondary xylem right in here, secondary xylem. This is the original pith in the center. The primary xylem is located right here. This is secondary xylem. This is then secondary phloem, and a little bit of primary phloem out there, and then cork cambium, and then cork. So this is a picture showing like fire scars right here, and you can sort of date these. But look over here. Even without a microscope, you could see that these lines represent the years of wood, which are the years of secondary xylem. You now know. And so cork cambium is a meristematic tissue that forms on the outermost part of the tree, and it results in the formation of these cork cells. Cork's really important. It has a lot of this waxy material. You're familiar with what cork feels like and the texture of cork. It has this waxy lipid material which prevents water loss, but it also is a barrier against physical damage and also pathogens. And also fire. When you look at specialized cork, like for example in a redwood, it's extremely thick. It could be up to like a foot in diameter. It's pretty impenetrable, and so that's a clear adaptation to fire. And so this is a really nice diagram here. This shows inside, okay, let's look at the green again. This is the vascular cambium. The vascular cambium is a lateral meristem, and so is the cork cambium. The vascular cambium is producing secondary xylem, and it's also producing secondary phloem. The cork cambium is producing cork. So this is considered to be the sapwood and the heartwood. I'll come back to the heartwood in a moment. Bark is a combination of periderm and phloem. So you can't remove the bark of a tree and without killing it, because you need that phloem. And so again, here's a diagram, but this is labeled, it's nice, under the microscope. Again, here is secondary xylem, right here, secondary xylem. Here's the late wood and the early wood, meaning dry and rainy seasons. Here's the secondary phloem. Here's the vascular cambium, and there is the cork cambium. I know it's hard to see it, but these are the cells that are dividing, producing the cork. And so here's another picture. Vascular cambium, secondary xylem, secondary phloem. And so bark refers to the secondary phloem, the cork cambium, and the cork. And so you need to have that in order for the plant to be able to survive. And so here's another cross section. Different pictures will help. Here's the heartwood. It's a little bit darker in coloration. The sapwood. Here's the vascular cambium, which makes the xylem and the phloem, and the cork cambium, which makes the cork. And so look at this picture here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the heartwood right here. Do you notice how this area is it's a little darker in color? It's still xylem. There's no doubt about it. That's xylem, and then this lighter wood right here is also xylem. So this is secondary xylem. So you're like, well, where's the vascular cambium? It's really towards the outer part of the plant, of the tree. And there's a lot happening there. We've been looking at slides under the microscope, and so this is all secondary. And so why, though, the dark in the inside? The heartwood no longer conducts water. So the sapwood, I just want to emphasize this is rather important. So the sapwood is here, this lighter color, sap, and then this darker area right here is considered to be the heart of the tree, the heartwood. Now, geez, it no longer conducts water, what good is it? And it's like, well, it supplies the tree with tremendous stability and strength on the inside. And that's because its xylem it gets all lignified. In other words, do you remember that substance that was sort of this not a carbohydrate, but an organic molecule with a lot of alcohol groups? And it helps to sort of darken the wood, and it helps, and these resins help the core of the tree to not only for strength, but also protects it from other, wood-boring insects and fungi that are trying to hurt it. So the heartwood is really important for the life of the tree, but it doesn't conduct water so much. But check this out. The heartwood doesn't conduct water. I was mentioning that before, but the sapwood does. And so that is your living, no, I'm sorry, not living because it's dead. I meant to say dead. But that's what's conducting water up the tree. It's no longer alive, but it's really important, the sapwood. And so here is a picture of the heartwood in the center here. Here's your sapwood. So all of that's secondary xylem. Here are the rays that are moving laterally out here. Here is the vascular cambium, which is producing the phloem, which is rather thin. So if this is a maple tree and you wanted to get some maple syrup to come out of this, all you have to do is just go just below the bark, and you'll penetrate into this thin layer called the phloem, and that's what will produce the sort of the sugar water, which is what we like about maple syrup. And then all of this is the secondary xylem. It's pretty cool. And so I thought I'd show you this picture. This is a giant sequoia redwood tree, of course, and this is in Yosemite National Park. It's a picture from a long time ago. You can tell by the car here. This is in an area called Wawona, and this is kind of, in some ways, tragic, in some ways, interesting historically, because the early people that were sort of hanging out in the redwood trees thought it would be clever to cut a tunnel through these trees. They're so wide in diameter that it will allow like horses and carriages to go through, and then eventually automobiles are able to go through it. So it was quite a big tourist attraction. People came around the world to check this tunnel tree out. And you're like, well, is the tree going to die from putting a big hole in it this way? This is a good question. Most of the damage done to the tree, this wouldn't, by the way, this would not be allowed today. We know a lot, this isn't happening. But the inside of the tree, mainly the damage is the heartwood on the inside, and that doesn't affect the movement of water up this redwood tree, which is mainly in the sapwood, which is towards the outer part. And so the tree can live for many years, even after this mutilization. And so as we sort of progress, like just a little review, if you don't mind, from on the very top of the plant, we got this apical meristem, right, at the very tip of the tree, and that's primary growth, so that's going up towards the sky. And then we got these primary meristems, protoderm, which becomes the epidermis, the procambium, which becomes the vascular tissue, and then the ground, which becomes the cortex of the stem, or the pith to the inside. But eventually, the lateral meristems, which there are two, vascular cambium and cork cambium, the vascular cambium will eventually produce the secondary xylem towards the inside and the secondary phloem, and then the cork cambium produces the cork, which is then considered periderm. So that's kind of an interesting flow right there. And so the two lateral meristems, vascular produces the secondary xylem and phloem, and cork cambium produces the bark, ultimately the cork. But there's also secondary growth in roots. I'm not sure if you realize this, that even within the root can become rather thick as well. And so what's interesting is that though the root can develop bark on the outside of it, that isn't where water is being absorbed. And so deep, deep, deep in the soil is where the young roots are, which are very thin. And that's where water absorption and mineral absorption takes place. That is, again, if you're a redwood tree, and then your roots are a little bit more closer to the surface, and they grow more laterally than they do deep. And so the secondary growth in roots, check this out. It's almost like an extension of the stem itself, but it's thick. They're thick and they're impenetrable. And so this helps to provide further support of the tree. It helps to anchor the plant down. It helps to transport water, but it doesn't absorb water. And so finally, you can see here, check this out. This one has so much bark on it that it even has some of the roots actually have lichen growing on it as well, which is kind of cool. So over the years, the roots can become woodier and tough bark develops. But this is not where water is being absorbed. That's happening much deeper down below. So I hope you enjoyed this video on secondary growth in plants and the formation of wood. Thanks for watching.